We can't ignore this. And it is the product, the byproduct of a siloed system at the Pentagon that exempts itself from everything. The Pentagon stands out. It's one of the few federal agencies that cannot produce a certified audit, what's called an unqualified audit. The biggest spender, the biggest procurer, the biggest employer in the federal government, and it can't abide by those rules. It exempts itself from the GSA schedule of purchasing, where we get discounts and we can try to get best price for off-the-shelf products. No, they've got their own. When we passed FATAR, we had a sort of dance around the Pentagon, because if we had gone there, we would have had jurisdictional problems here, and they would have objected. And then, ironically, not you, Mr. Mader, but a previous person at OMB then, of course, objected to the bill because it didn't include DOD. I thought, well, we'd love to include DOD. They don't want to be included.
What the fuck?
And we don't want to keep up, the bill bottled up forever, on that. And now we've got $125 billion. I mean, that is the budget of some whole federal agencies. What we could do with that. And the gentleman from Michigan makes an excellent point, and frankly, at some point, if this committee could make a real contribution without designing to step on toes in, frankly, examining some of these issues a little bit more in depth in terms of processes that are not in place and rules and regulations that apply to other federal governments in terms of transparency and reporting that are not abided by because the Pentagon exempts itself. And it's so big, we sometimes, frankly, as a Congress, have turned a blind eye to it. And so I applaud my colleague from Michigan. I associate myself with his remarks, and I would hope in the next Congress this committee might try to make some contributions in trying to put systems in place that would prevent this kind of scandal from recurring. And I join him in that. Mr. Mader, the goal here with the Data Act is to have harmonized reporting standards, full transparency, and so I can look across the federal family, 24 agencies, and see the same formatted data so that I can actually compare apples and apples as opposed to this hodgepodge we have right now. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Congressman.
And what would be your best estimate of when we can achieve that goal?
We will. So, if you remember, under the Data Act, we're adding new data elements, right? So we've been reporting spend, but we're going to have actually more spend. So we're going to have in excess of $3 billion as opposed to the little over $2 billion, because we're adding new, spend into the equation. The other significant, and it's a real benefit, is now we're going to report that spend for, let's say, a contract, right? And we're going to be able to point that contract back to what was the appropriation, what was the program activity, and what was the object class.
Right.
And that's the real power then of both within a department, but then horizontally saying who's using funds for this kind of activity.
I agree, and thank you. But I'm Citizen Q, and I want to see how my federal government is spending and accounting for spending. When will I be able to go online and any federal agency, I'm going to see that harmonized set of standards so that I can actually follow the picture? When will the Data Act be fully online and implemented?
For the vast majority of the CFO Act agencies who represent in excess of 90% of the government-wide spend, we're going to be able to see that in May.
In May?
In May of this year, in May of 17, right.
All right.
I mean,
Mr. Meadows and I are going to be ready, I think, with
no,
we
appreciate that. We appreciate the healthy skepticism. But, I know there's been a lot of concern about, will this work? And I think my colleague from SBA, and we've been using them as our prototype, because while they may not be the biggest department, they actually have all of the elements, all of the complexity that a DHS has. So we said, let's use them as our proof of concept, and Mr. Gribbin just testified, they actually dumped all their data into the broker, and they're
Yeah.
generating reports. It works.
But SBA is not part of the pilot project for grants and contracts, right?
No, HHS, well, two separate things. So the pilot for Section 5 is to reduce burden, separate and distinct from the rest of the Data Act.
Right. But SBA gives a lot of grants and contracts.
Oh, yeah.
And it might be useful if they were part of the pilot project with respect to.
Well, the pilot project, so HHS, as you know, is sort of our agent to execute that. And the reason we selected HHS is because they are the 800-pound gorilla with regard to
Yeah.
ransom. So, they work with the other, grant-making agencies. So Tim and other agencies know what HHS is doing. But again, I go back to my point is, if there was any concern on this committee's point as to whether the concept that we introduced back in, 2014 about the broker and what Treasury was going to do and agile development, I'm here to say it works. He just testified to it. It
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. And just final point, how cooperative is the Pentagon with what we're trying to do with the Data Act in light of what you just heard Mr. Wahlberg and myself say with respect to the $125 billion, I don't know, lost money?
I can't comment on that post story, but with regard
No, I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking about
No,
compliance and
they
cooperation.
they are cooperating. And actually, what we're trying to do is leverage the work, Congressman, that we're doing on trying to get them to be audit ready to help them with the Data Act. And it's the same folks that are working on both of those initiatives. So Dave and I have met with them multiple times in person. They're not sitting back saying, we're exempt. I mean, they are working on it.
Good. And just to clarify, and then so when you say by May of next year, full, hopefully 90% implementation and compliance, you're including the Pentagon?
They're going to, so the Pentagon.
That was a long pause, Mr. Mayor.
No, the Pentagon will continue to report, they're going to report their full appropriation, right? What they're going to be deficient in is actually making some of these quality assurance linkages between our financial system and the management system. Because remember, what we've been criticized, and rightfully so in the past by GAO, about the quality of the data that's coming in, because if it came in from the procurement system, but it doesn't match with the financial system, you got to wonder which one is right. So the linkages between these two that both Courtney and Tim have testified to is critical. That's where DOD is running into significant challenges because of the multiplicity of their procurement systems and their financial systems.
Thank you.